Welcome back, aliens. My name is Naveen Reddy, and let's continue with the series on Python. Now, till this point, we have talked about different types of variables, right? We have seen instance variable and a class variable. We can call them as static variables, right? Now, in this video, we'll talk about methods and different types of methods. Now, we have seen that, right? When we talk about objects, object will have two things, right? The first one it will have is variables, and second one is methods. Now, variable to store data and methods for the behavior, right? So if you want to perform some operation, that's where methods comes into picture. As human as well, we know something and we do something, right? So those are your variables and methods, right? Now here, when we talk about methods, we have different types of methods. Now, we have three types of methods. The first one is instance method. The second one we have is class method, and then we have static method. Oh, hold on. When we talk about variables, we only have two, right? Because class and static behave the same way in variables. But hold on, in variables we have the same thing, right? In variables we have class variables and static variables which are same. That's not the case with methods, okay? So class methods and static methods are different in methods. Okay, so let's get started. So understand this concept, we'll take an example. So let's take a class here and we'll name this class as student. So in this student class, we'll be having multiple variables, right? Now, of course, when we talk about student, we have names, we have roll number, and then we have marks. At this point, let me only focus on marks, okay? So what I will do is let me create a function, which is your init function, because I want to declare some variables. So I will say self dot. Now I want to go for three variables here. One is marks1, and marks1 I want to pass this value from the user, okay? Of course, you can define your own values here, but I want to pass the value when I create the object. And the way you do that is by saying self comma, you will pass m1, m2, m3. I want to pass three variables, and m1 value will be assigned to the object by saying self dot m1 equal to m1. I will go to same thing for m2. I will say m2, and the same thing for m3, right? So we got m1, m2, and m3. Now we got three variables. I want to create certain objects here. Okay, let's create objects for this. I will go back here. So let's create the object here. I will say s1 is equal to, and as usual we can create multiple objects, but time it will go for s1 equal to, I will say student. That's my first object, and let me get one more object. Will say s2 equal to student. So we got two objects here. One is s1 and s2. I also want to pass a value to it, right? Because we are not passing it. So let me pass any value, a random value. I'm not actually saying what I'm typing here, but then we got three values there. And here as well, I will go for any random value. That doesn't make any sense to see that. So we got these values, right? So first student got 34, 67, and 32. Second student got 87, 32, and 12. Now what I do is, of course, these variables here, m1, m2, and m3, those are instance variables, right? We have talked about that. At this point, we have not created any methods. Let me just do that. In fact, before going for methods, let me also create a variable, a static variable this time. And the way you create a static or a class variable, just by defining or declaring the variable outside the constructor, right? So here, I will say I have a variable and we'll name this variable as school, because of course, right, a student belongs to a school, right, or a college. At this point, all the students belongs to the same school, which is Tedesco. Imagine if we have Tedesco University, we'll be having a school. So we got the school name as well, right? So you can print those values by simply saying, in fact, you can print those values here as well. You can say s1.m1 and x2.m1. We can do that. What I'm concerned about here is I want to know the average of marks, okay? So I've got these three variables, right? I want to perform certain operation. How do you find the average, right? So the logic of average you can define by yourself, you know, everyone have their own way of doing it. I will be doing a very simple calculation. So let me create a method called as def, method called average. So when I say object.average, it will give me average marks, okay? So I want to return the average marks. And the way you do that by saying return, you want to return the value. And here you will simply say m1, or not just m1, you have to say self.m1 plus self.m3. So we have to divide this number by 3. That's how you find the average, right? And we know the stuff, right? That's how you find the average of multiple numbers. So we got the average and we are returning the value. Okay, so now this, if you focus on this average, this is an instance method. How do you know that's an instance method? Because we are passing self. Now when you say self, it means it belongs to a particular object, right? Of course, we are defining that in a class, but it works with the object, and that's why you're passing self. So if you want to call average, you have to say s1.average, or you have to say s2.average, because we are passing self. We cannot simply say student.average because we are not using object there, but in this case, we have to say s1.avg. That's how you do it. So you have to say s1.avg. It will give you the value, so I will print the value here. I would say print the average here. So let's run this code and you can see it works. We got the average of first student. You can do the same thing for second student. You can, instead of saying s1.average, you can say s2.average. And if you run this code, you can see we got the average for second student as well, and they almost same. I don't know why. Okay, so after changing value, we got different average, you know. So this was just a coincidence, you know. I've given some values and then they were giving the same average, right? So yeah, so you got different average for s1 and different average for s2. That works. Now what we're going to do is, so this method here, this average is an instance method because it works with the object. Now in instance itself, we have two different types, okay? The first type of instance which we use is called as accessors, and the second type we use is mutators. So we have accessors and mutators. Now what is accessors? So if you are only fetching the value, see, ultimately when you talk about this method, they are only responsible to work with variables, right, which is your instance variables. So if you want to just fetch the value of the instance variable, we will be using accessors. If you want to modify the value, you will use mutators. So the way you do that, example, if you want to fetch the value of m1, so if you want to know the value for m1, you can fetch directly. You can say print s1 dot m1, you will get the value like this. Or instead of using the variables, we should actually use methods. So what we'll do here is we'll say def, and we'll define the function as get m1. So we'll say get m1, and which m1 you want. So you will say return, I want to return the value for self dot m1. This is how you do it. So if you want the value for m1, you will say get m1, and you got the value. Normally it's not compulsory to have that get keyword there. You can also say m1, that's fine. But when you write a code conventionally, you simply specify get there. So whenever you say get methods, or in fact to set the value, we use set methods. Example, if you want to set the value for m1, you will say set m1. Of course we are passing that from a constructor, so we can say set m1, and you can pass some values here. I would pass a value f, I will say a value, and this value will be assigned to m1. So we'll say self dot m1 is equal to value. So you can use constructor to pass the value, or we can use setters, right? So we have get methods and we have set methods. Now for different variables, we'll be having different get and set methods, right? So if you have 3 variables, you might be using 3 get methods and 3 set methods, and that's why they're called as getters and setters, right? So getters get the value, setters set the value. Getters only fetch the value, it will not change the value. That's why we say accessors. Setters, they change the value, and that's why we say mutators. So this makes sense, right? And again, you can call these methods, right? But this works. Now once you talked about instance, the second type we have is a class method. Now why we use class methods? See, if you talk about these variables m1, m2, m3, those are your instance variable, right? An instance variable can be used with instance methods. What about this one? This is school, right? Now school is basically your class variable, and if you want to work with class variable, you need to use a class method. And the way you do that, let's say I want to know the info of a student, so I will say def info. Info will print the name of the school, okay? So let's say if you are studying for Telesco, it will print Telesco. And of course all the students belong to same school, right? If you change school name for one student, it will affect all the students. Example, this channel name earlier was Naveen Skills, right? And we have changed it to Telesco. So if the name changes for one subscriber, it will affect all the subscribers, right? And that's what is happening here. So if I want to print info and that to a school name, I don't want marks here. Of course we don't want to work with self, we want to work with class, right? So if you are working with instance, you will use a self keyword. If you're working with a class variables, you have to use class, CLS, okay? It should be CLS, it should not be something else. Now once you got that, you can simply print the value. So you can say print, or you can return the value, your choice. We can say return CLS dot school. That's how you do it. So you have to say CLS dot school. So whenever you want to work with class variable, you have to say CLS dot school. Okay, but then how do you call info? It's very simple. You will say print s1 dot info. We can do that, but there's only one problem. Info should work with all the objects, right? It's not specific to one object. So instead of using s1, we can use a student dot info. Now this should work. Let's try. I will say run. Oh, we got an error. It says info missing one required potential argument, which is, or positional argument, which is CLS. Oh, we have to pass CLS? That's weird. I don't want to pass CLS, right? In fact, we are not even doing that for average. We are not passing S1. Here also, I don't want to pass thing. Normally what happens, if you want to create a class method, we need to use a special symbol or special way of doing that. And we can use something called decorators. So we have to say @ and you have to mention this as a class method. Again, we'll talk about decorators later in detail, but time being, we got a class method as a decorator. So if you want to use info as a class method, you have to say @ class method, okay? That's how you define it. So let's run this code now, and it works. You can see that we got this code there. Quite simple, right? So now we know about instance method because it works with instance variables. Now we know about class method because it works with class variables. How about static methods? Say, think about this. Let's say if you want any method, okay? It doesn't matter what method we want here. If you want a method which has nothing to do with instance variable, which has nothing to do with the class variables, we want to do something extra, okay, so something different which is not concerned with the variables, at that time you will be using a static method, because we are not concerned about instance variable, we are not concerned about class variables. Example, let's say I want to print the info about this class, okay, not about student but the class. So I will say def about, in fact, instead of saying info for class, I would say get school name. That will make more sense. So I'm changing the name from info to get school for class method, okay, not for this. And let me also change from here. So we'll say get school. Here I will define a function, and the function name would be info, because when I say info, I want to know the class name, okay. So this is not related to the object, this is not related to class, so I will keep it blank, okay. So if you don't want to relate this to a class, keep it blank. If you don't want to relate this to a object, keep it blank. No self, no class, okay, static method. And this will return, this will print, in fact not return, this will print. We can do whatever you want. So we can say this is student class, you can do that, right? So we are printing this is student class and in ABC module. That's it. You can print whatever you want. As I mentioned, important is this method is nothing to do with the class variables and the instance variable. Now where it will be useful, so let's say if you want to perform any operation which has something to do with the other objects, other class objects, we can use static methods here. If you want to perform some operation like finding a factorial of a number, right? Because the factorial has nothing to do with the class variables or instance variable. Maybe you're passing a value, you just want to know what's a factorial of the number, you can use static methods there. Now since we are using a static method, we need to use a special decorator here as well. So if we have to say any guess, we will be using static method. So for class method we have to say class method, and for static method we have to use static method, okay, and then you can call it. So you can say, so you have to use a class name, so you will say student.info, right? So this is static, so you don't have to pass anything, not even class and not even an object. Let's run this code and it works, okay. So basically we have different types of methods. We have instance method which works with instance variable, class method works with class variable, and static works with nothing. It has, if you want to do something extra with your class, nothing to do with class variables or instance variables, go with static. So if you have any more questions, let me know in the comment section. And so if you have not subscribed to the channel, do it quickly. That's it everyone. Bye bye.